What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Today, it's only taken me about a year and a half to get this guest on, but I finally was able to round her up. She's so popular, Miss Lacey Dunn.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body Podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Welcome to the show, Lacey.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so sorry it's taken such a long period of time. I am so honored to be connected here with you today.
It's okay. I mean, I'm sure you have adoring fans all over the world. You've got a book. Tell us about the book. Tell us a little bit about that.
The Women's Guide to Hormonal Harmony. I essentially wrote it because I help so many women that are suffering with hormonal issues, gut issues, nutrition, and they don't understand their body and they can't get their body back to a healthy place, or they feel like they don't have control over their own body. So I wrote that as a resource for women that could not work with me, could not afford to work with me. And I just put it out in the world. And it's been amazing seeing it change so many lives and help people and be a resource. So that is available on Amazon if anybody has any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, you should definitely check that out because Lacey is not, I mean, I think people see registered dietitian and they're like, oh, food guide pyramid.
Yeah.
Here we go. Chocolate milk in hospitals. And I'm like, no, because, not all registered dietitians, just like not all doctors are bad, right? But you went above and beyond, like most of the stuff that I see in your videos on social media. I'm guessing you didn't learn in school. I didn't learn in school. You went above and beyond because you have a personal connection to many of the topics you discussed, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, at this point, I've dealt with almost everything, whether that's hypothyroidism, mold, candida, SIBO, parasites, you name it. Yep, my cavitation. Right? I freaking even forget about that. My brain just like says, okay, trauma, put it in the back of your brain. Yeah, my jaw cavitation from my wisdom teeth too. It's been crazy what I've had to deal with. But honestly, I wouldn't take it away. It's helped me fully understand how to work with my patients and have empathy and be able to 100% help people more.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's how I got, I was going to go to an MD program, did all the prereqs and did well academically, but I had a jaw surgery where they broke my upper and lower jaw my senior year in undergrad. And now I know, I have the knowledge to know it was a totally unnecessary surgery. But back then they're like, if you don't have this done, you're not going to have any of your own teeth by the time you turn 30 years of age. I'm like, oh, that was fear mongering. Yeah. But they did the opposite of what you want to do. They brought my mandible up and back, which created sleep apnea when I didn't have it before. So now I have an appliance at night to bring it down and forward. But I had a lot of hardware in. I still have some in, but we found an integrative oral surgeon at UPenn back in 2014. And he said, Dr. Tim, I'll go in and take out as much as I can, but I'm going to have to leave some because it's osteo-integrated. And if I snap it off, you're going to be in a lot of pain when you wake up. And so, I respected that, and he got as much out as he could. And I have a little device called a lumen photon machine that it's like a strap you wrap around your jaw, and it has a NICO, a cavitation setting. And I bought it probably 9 years ago. And the guy who told me about it owns a Cavitot machine where he goes into South Carolina and North Carolina to different dental clinics testing for cavitations. And he saw people able to get rid of their cavitations without surgery using this machine. Otherwise, I wouldn't have believed it if you just said, hey, there's this machine, it can get rid of cavitations, but he's got the empirical, proof. But you had the surgery. I have some colleagues who do lasers. They start with the laser. If that doesn't work, they'll go to the surgery.
Wow.
But it's something that it's so overlooked. And I hear people say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. I'm like, you can see it. I mean, you got to know what you're looking for, but you can see it on the CBCT. So they leave the periodontal ligament in. Were you having jaw pain, or what caused you to go the route of the cavitation?
Actually, I found it because I was having pain just in one of my molars, and they said it was a slightly cracked tooth. And so they took a look through the x-ray. They're like, okay, we're going to do a cone beam scan. We're going to look even further. And when they did the x-ray, they said, okay, well, it looks like it's slightly down, like under the molar. So we might need to necessarily like just pull it out or dig it even deeper. And I sent my results over to Dr. Blodgett, and amazing up in Portland. And he said, no, that's a cavitation. And so I didn't know anything about it really, but I looked into it. And within like 2 weeks of getting that result, I scheduled my surgery because I was not going to deal with that from everything that I was seeing with long-term complications. So essentially they went in there and they saw one on the cone beam scan, but when they removed that, when they went in for the surgery, they actually found 3 of them.
Wow.
Which is crazy from all my wisdom teeth. So they removed those, but I'm very lucky because I know so my parents live in Charleston. I know we talked about this.
Yeah.
There's a same lady who had the exact same infection that I had. And ultimately they didn't get rid of the infection. Her body is so shut down now from that. It got into her central nervous system. She can't digest anything. She can't assimilate anything. She's on enteral nutrition with oxygen mask to survive. It's awful. So I feel
and
very
so
lucky.
she tried to have the cavitation surgery. They weren't able to get it.
No, I don't know all the ins and the outs, but I do know like 100% it was all because of a cavitation.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and you're basically being poisoned from within.
You are.
And
Yeah.
the teeth are derived from the same embryological tissue as the brain. So what you do to the teeth, you're essentially doing to the nervous system.
Yep.
And now I want to ask you, because I've seen people who are very constitutionally strong and they go in for a cavitation surgery and it kind of knocks them on the rear end, so to speak. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, the hard part is while I had the cavitation and while I was getting the surgery, I also was living in mold. And after 2 weeks after the surgery, I moved out of mold. And I don't know if your listeners have, well, obviously you've had Dr. Jill Carnahan on here. So when you get out of mold, you can feel worse before you feel any better. So for me, like I had the surgery, the day of the surgery, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I feel so good. But then immediately after I went back to my place, packed things up and then moved out. And then I felt like I got hit by a truck for like 2 months. So I can't say necessarily, but I do remember it was pretty rough afterwards.
Yeah. And you seem like the type who's like constantly on the go, 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 type A.
Yes.
So was it hard to kind of slow down and take things in and heal?
I did not slow down. That's my one regret. I did trash my adrenals even further, and I did have to learn that the hard way. I ultimately did slow down after like it just wasn't working. But yeah, it was definitely a process for sure.
Yeah, so you mentioned adrenals. Let's talk about, so allostatic load, right? Obviously, you know what that term is, but for the viewers and listeners, allostatic load is basically the total accumulation of internal stressors plus external stressors. So if we have a high allostatic load, we want to decrease our volume in the gym. A lot of people say, oh, I had a stressful day, I'm going to go crush it in the gym. You can still go to the gym, but you want to decrease the volume. You can create the same metabolic stimulus by using the same resistance, but you don't want to do large copious amounts of steady state cardio, right?
Right.
That's going to add, basically a big cortisol shower to you. And then you see this a lot in bigger competitors. They get Wilson's temperature syndrome, basically downregulation of thyroid and thyroid receptors. And, from low calorie dieting, crash dieting. Talk a little bit about that and cortisol and the HPA axis.
Yeah. So when it comes down to allostatic load and stress, we have internal, external stress, perceived versus real stress. And in the end, the body has no clue what stressor is coming at it. It can be a physical stress like overtraining or undereating, but it also can be mental, emotional, spiritual, past traumas we haven't worked on. And anything that causes the body to basically fill up that stress bucket can cause you to tip to where that stress is no longer just affecting your adrenals per se. It's also going down into your thyroid, your sex hormones, your digestion, inflammation, insulin resistance. So that bucket can fill with multiple stressors, and then you're teeter-tottering into downstream effects for the rest of your body. So, like if we're talking, for example, for my surgery, what I did not do was lower those stressors. I was still working as normal. I had decreased a little bit of exercise, but I wasn't working on the physical and the emotional and the mental aspect of that. So then I did see continuous down regulation in my digestion, in my hormones, in my thyroid. And you have to take into consideration all those things in order to heal your body.
Absolutely. And so you talked about, there's been a lot of talk the past few years, adrenal fatigue's not real. And I get what they're saying, but
Yeah.
reality is if cortisol is really high or really low, that doesn't tell us what's causing it, but you do need to address it. And then you can work on peeling away those layers of stress, whether it's mold, gut dysbiosis, anything that creates inflammation is going to raise cortisol to try and quench the inflammatory stressor. But mitochondrial function is obviously very important. But if cortisol levels are really low, I treat hormones like a hierarchy. So we address insulin, cortisol, and thyroid first,
Yeah.
then sex hormones, because hormone clinics are popping up all over the place, and sometimes they help, sometimes they don't, because if you have low cortisol, low thyroid, high cortisol, high thyroid, it's going to cause downstream effects, like you said, with sex
Yeah.
hormones, right?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And I see that a lot time and time again, especially when women and men have low testosterone in the presence of a lot of inflammation and high cortisol or low cortisol. If you add that testosterone in, one, it's not going to do the job. Two, you're actually going to be worsening the inflammation in your body. You're not going to respond to it well. So 100%, you got to fix the top and then filter down. And I write this in my book and I tell my clients the hormones are responding. They're their fire alarm. They're your body asking for help. So you have to find those fires and put out those fires, and the hormones will come.
Right. Absolutely. And in men, obviously you're going to aromatize a lot more of your testosterone into estradiol
Mhm.
if you're inflamed, whether it's mold, gut dysbiosis, Lyme, jaw cavitations, any of those things, correct?
Yep, exactly.
And with women, what would you say? So the average person who comes to you, is their main goal weight loss or improved energy?
That's a great question because a lot of times, a lot of women are just literally lit up like a Christmas tree with the symptoms.
Yeah.
It's weight gain, brain fog, lack of energy, hair loss, acne, digestive issues. But a lot of women, they just want to feel like they can survive day to day. They're just kind of just like on a hamster wheel, just go, go, go.
Right.
So a lot of women, it's energy. I want to feel better. And despite doing everything that they think is normal, they're eating
Right.
well. They think nutrition is on point. So you've got to dig into those deeper things.
Yeah. And that's something I see a lot is people are like, well, what can I eat to fix this? And I mean, obviously nutrition is incredibly important, but if you have something like mycotoxins, heavy metals, like even the best diet on the planet is not going to get rid of, directly, the supplementation is necessary, at least in the short term,
Mhm.
along with getting rid of the exposure. You live in the southeastern US. I live in the southeastern US. So humidity levels, I got an air doctor and a dehumidifier running behind me. And so talk to us about mold and what it does in the body.
What does it not do is the true question. So we know mold in itself, not only is it damaging to the mitochondria, the cell membrane, which are the powerhouse of the cell, protecting us against different toxins, helping us to make energy, ATP, DNA, RNA, all of that, but it's damaging itself to specific organs, whether that's our kidneys, our liver, our lungs, our brain, leading potentially to things like Alzheimer's. But it also is very detrimental to things like our cortisol levels, our thyroid, our sex hormones. Basically, what it all does is it starts everything with your HPA axis. We got our hypothalamus, our pituitary, everything there. And it's going to cause all these down regulatory mechanisms to where there's so many things like MSH, AMH, and essentially what happens for us is there's this just downstream effect on our entire body. And I see a lot of times with mold in particular, the first thing that people kind of notice is there's a little bit of like brain fog and fatigue, and there might be some digestive distress. But then I know we talked about this earlier, then you can have either rapid weight gain, rapid weight loss, increased urine output, static shocks. You could develop anxiety, ADHD, autism-like behaviors. There's so much that can happen with mold. And unfortunately, it can go downhill quickly. Very
Yeah,
quickly with exposure.
absolutely. And a lot of times it colonizes the paranasal sinuses. I have a colleague in Atlanta who's an ENT he's had issues with mold in the past, and he does a procedure where he goes in and scrapes down the sinuses. And I have a colleague who's a nutritionist, a registered dietitian, who she was basically suicidal. And she knew she had mold exposure, but she went to him. He did the procedure, and it took a few months to feel better, but now she's back to work full time and everything. So, all of her microglial cells in the brain were on fire,
What
causing,
do you have Mark-ons?
she had Marcons and just basically the colonization of,
Oh,
the nasal passages so that they were, secreting those mycotoxins and cytokines into the brain, affecting
yeah.
the microglial cells.
Mhm.
And so, decreased blood flow to the frontal lobe.
Yep.
And, obviously that alters how your brain works. But do you see it causing weight gain in people?
Yeah, weight gain and weight loss. For me, it was weight loss. Now, I don't know necessarily if that was more so because of the GI issues, malabsorption, everything I had to deal with that, plus the cavitation with all the inflammation. But I see a lot of times it's weight gain, and it's rapid weight gain, and it's big time water retention.
Yeah.
I didn't go over even like the histamine response. So the mast cell issues that you develop too when it comes down to molds. But yeah, it's a downstream effect on the entire body, and not anything I would wish on even my worst enemy, which I don't even have one, but like it's awful to have to deal with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when you get people saying, "Oh, I can only eat 8 or 9 foods. I react to everything." And then they start reacting to the supplements that they need to heal from the
Right.
mycotoxins.
Mm-hmm.
So,
They
we
can't
have
even
to,
take B vitamins. You're like, oh my
right,
gosh, how
exactly.
it's everything. It's crazy. Yeah, that's the whole. It depends on the exposure, how long the exposure's been, and then the type of mycotoxins that are present, or the bucket effect, I call it, like the histamine bucket
Yeah.
effect, the inflammatory bucket effect. But yeah, it's pretty awful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like Dr. Jill says, mold is the most common trigger of mast cells, followed by Lyme and other stealth pathogens, and then psychological stress. And then if you have methylation issues on top of that, that's gonna create issues metabolizing histamine. So your histamine
Mhm.
bucket goes, or if you have DAO issues in the gut, then that's gonna cause the histamine bucket to go. So I think it makes people, their entire physiology has gone awry, essentially. What is the main thing that you see today that you didn't see 4 or 5 years ago in terms of people complaining about?
That's a really good question. I would say what I see more is this like up, down in chronic fatigue. And the why behind that, there's so much. But previously, I would just see like chronic fatigue. But recently, it's been like, oh, I feel good. And then I don't feel good. I feel good. And then I don't feel good. And it's just like this chronic up, down issue. And I definitely think it's a combination of inflammation, histamine, adrenals all together. But that's the weirdest thing that I've seen recently is this up, down, up, down. And it's the hardest for clients to have to deal with because you're like, oh, I'm feeling better. And then you're like, oh, no, I'm not feeling better. So I
Yeah,
think definitely it's a protective mechanism for the body
right.
with that. The allostatic load is part of that with why the body's reacting that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times people they start feeling better and then they tend to overdo it because they're like, I want to catch
Exactly.
up on the things I missed out on. And I'm like, oh, you're just one stressor away. So I tell people the worst thing I can do for you is just get rid of your symptoms and then send you on your way. Like we want to eradicate as many levels of stress, as we possibly can. So you're obviously a huge fitness buff. How long have you been doing fitness competitions?
Well, I haven't done one since 2017, but I did them from 2013 to 2017 Absolutely loved them. And at first, I didn't trash my body, but then I did end up causing my own hypothyroidism through cortisol dysregulation through one of the preps that I did back in, I think, like 2015, 2016, by essentially just doing my master's degree, my dietetic internship, online training, and training for the comp. So, been there, done
So
that.
you started doing them in undergrad, is that right?
I did. I started them
Okay,
when I was at UCF, and then I did them at UGA, and then I finished out my quote unquote bodybuilding years when I went to get my master's.
gotcha. Okay, was it at Texas Christian or Texas
Texas Women's.
Texas Women's? Okay, I knew it was Texas something. Because I did my homework. I read up on my guests.
Honored.
But yeah, with fitness competitions, I see. I mean, did you go on the really low calorie diets? Because I was just talking to a guy who I knew growing up. We were pretty good friends, and in the past, 10 years, he's done 6 or 7 competitions, and he said he's done with them because all of his lab markers were so awry, like his lipid panel, his kidney function, EGFR, BUN, creatinine. Did you have any of that going on?
No, honestly, I got really lucky. I never had to put my calories ever under 1700, ever. I never had to do more than 2 times a week cardio, but I still had detrimental consequences because of that. And it's all about the stress. So for me, I was still overtraining. I still had too much on my stress bucket. And so I still developed that hypothyroid state because I was just constantly stuck in fight or flight and my body had to adapt somehow. So
Right.
I do see, because I work with a lot of different competitors, whether that's bodybuilding, wellness, well, it would be bodybuilding, wellness, figure, bikini, you name it. And it's amazing to see there is some resiliency for some people, but then others, there's no resiliency whatsoever. So it's a very hit or miss. And it depends on like, what are you doing? What's your training like? What's your overall stressor like? What are you taking supplemental wise? Are you taking like TRT, anabolic steroids, anything like that? And that greatly impacts your prep and your body's
Right.
resiliency.
Absolutely. So one thing I've wondered since I contacted you on Instagram was how does she say so dang lean all the time?
She
Like
is pretty
she,
lean. Now that you say that, I kind of, yeah, she is.
yeah, no, you. I mean you.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like I mean, it's just like shredded, like delts, striated delts, anterior, middle, posterior. Like, how do you even do that?
Honestly, I think it's 100% genetics. I do work hard in the gym, hands down, but my mom is a tiny little shredded machine. And so I really think genetics plays a role. But it's definitely changed over time, which I think is a good thing. Able
Yeah,
to store definitely more body fat than I used to, but I think it's definitely genetics for me. I wish I could say it's all hard work, but genetics
yeah.
play a big role with that.
But then the functional medicine, the biohacking, that plays a role too, right?
Yeah, big time. When it comes down to being able to stay leaner, you want to be able to optimize like your mitochondrial function, your insulin resistance. You want to be able to essentially work out in a way that's going to be beneficial for you versus, causing your body to then gain weight, have water retention, all that type of stuff. So I think for me, the reason why it's like easier is because I also do try and take care of myself as best I can and listen to my body. And I really focus on like the labs and optimizing function and all of that. So that plays a big role. Like if you are inflamed, you're not sleeping well, you're not hydrating yourself, you're not balancing your blood sugar, if you have a toxic bucket overload, your body's not going to be optimized and you're not
Yeah.
going to have the physique that you desire.
Yeah. I interviewed a colleague on the show and Dr. Marcos D. Andrade down in Miami, biohacks. And he works with Jake Paul and a lot of well-known athletes, but he said a lot of guys come in and they'll show them their protein shake bottle and it's like red dye 40 and all these other things that lower testosterone and they're asking for TRT. And he's like, well, before we go there, why don't we stop putting things in your body that intentionally lower? Because I mean, back in the day when I went to undergrad at Wake Forest, I would go to GMC and get jugs of muscle milk. And then like 4 or 5 years later, a data came out that showing that they had mercury and lead and
Lovely.
other metals. And but I didn't know. We didn't have access back then when I was undergrad. And so now I think a lot of people say, oh, you have to get X grams of protein, and obviously protein is important, but they're forgetting about protein being very energy intensive to digest. And so ultimately you want to get to the amino acid level. So if you're supplementing with amino acids, you're giving your body what it needs in the raw material form. It doesn't have to work quite as hard to break down and assimilate that, correct?
Oh yeah, I mean it's so much easier if you're doing something like essential amino acids versus the protein. But I
Right.
see honestly, you know, with the protein, a lot of people like overdo it and it becomes just like this inflammatory state for them of like just way overdoing that protein and that you don't need all that.
Right. Yeah, not only are you creating harmful toxic byproducts in the gut,
Mhm.
there's gluconeogenesis, right? And so you can synthesize glucose and glycogen from too much protein, correct?
You can. I would say I don't see that per se in a lot of my clients and the people that I work with. The
Mhm.
more protein, like I've physically tried this with a lot of my clients, just simply adding more protein, same calories. Nobody ever gains weight. So I don't see that as an issue, but I definitely do see there to be too much of an inflammatory response. And I do think it's more so gut related with excess protein that you don't need.
Right. Yeah. And Anna read another guy, Joel Green, and we talked about in the saccharolytic versus proteolytic fermentation in the gut. And you need some carbs for short chain fatty acid, butyrate, acetate, propionate to feed those good bacteria. So since we're talking about body composition and resistance training, let's talk about Akkermansia and bifidobacteria. What are they and why are they important?
So bifidobacteria are essentially, as well as Bacteroides, one of our main like healthy beneficial gut bugs or commensal gut bugs. And then Akkermansia are one of my favorites, very important for mucosal production. I kind of think of them like cows on a field. So they're creating mucus, they're chewing on the mucus, they're modulating the gut lining there. They're also helping to create short chain fatty acids, which in turn help to make B vitamins, vitamin K, neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, all of that. But we need a balance of these healthy beneficial gut bugs because not only do they prevent the weeds, the bad guys from proliferating, whether that's Klebsiella, Citrobacter, whatever you want, but they also help to create those short chain fatty acids, the neurotransmitters, everything there. And then there's the Akkermansia that plays such a big role too when it comes down to weight maintenance because they do help they are involved with satiety and our hunger cues and our hunger signals. So there's a lot going on there, but overall, these gut bugs for now, they're being depleted for a lot of different reasons, whether that's chronic antibiotics, a westernized diet, changing the pH from dysbiotic bacteria, leaky gut. There's a lot of different things, but these bacteria are very
Glyphosate.
important. Glyphosate included, anything that could come from like food dyes, food preservatives, like sodium benzoate, whatever it is, but they're being depleted by the things that we eat and the things that are around us, including car exhaust, and they have to be in a healthy beneficial level or that can actually cause insufficiency dysbiosis, which is the lack of the beneficial gut bugs. And I do
Right.
see that a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think you tell me your thoughts on this, but I used to be a consultant for microbiome labs, and I would teach other providers how to interpret their biome effects tests. And one thing that I would really emphasize is, if you have pathogens in the gut, sometimes it's necessary to take antimicrobials, but sometimes you can focus on the principle of niche exclusion. So if we feed the beneficial bugs, we can crowd out bad
Mhm.
bugs. So things like megaspore biotic, they do release 12 antimicrobial peptides. So they have, some antimicrobial effects, but they're also feeding the good guys.
Yep. Yep. And things like Saccharomyces boulardii, which can help to reduce those detrimental species, also support the gut lining, change the pH. There's a lot of other things that you could do without using herbals, but I'm a big herbal girl. I do love herbals.
I use biocidin quite a bit. Um, select other cases I'll use, like H. pylori, obviously, rancid gum, alicidin, things like that.
Mhm.
But, high dose olive oil or oregano extract, that can be just as bad as amoxicillin if you look at some of the studies. And so I like to use a combination versus a monotherapy like high doses of oil of oregano or whatever herb. That's why I like the biocidin because it's more or smaller doses of several herbs.
I do love biocidin. I've actually heard of a lot of different practitioners, because you mentioned the nose, using biocidin to go up into the nasal cavities to help to kill off bacteria there and yeast.
Yeah. And well, you probably know this company, but Microbalance Health Products.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Citra drops mixed with Dr. Hannah's nasal rinse solution. works well. And Dr. Dennis, that's the ENT I was referring to, who cleaned out my colleague's nose. And when you go in his office, before he'll even let you in, he has the EC3 fogger. He fogs you up and down because he's
Stop.
no, he really does. I've witnessed it myself. He is like, "Ah," he's fogging everybody down.
That's phenomenal. I love that.
Yeah, and I mean, he's like a human, mold detector. And when I worked
Right.
at a practice in Atlanta, we had a guy who would come up from Tampa, Florida, and he had a dog. I think it was a German Shepherd mix, but it was trained to detect mold. Like instead of a drug detecting dog, this was a mold detecting dog. And it was pretty phenomenal. Like we had one client, we knew she had mycotoxins, we just couldn't figure out where they were coming from. And it turned out her grandmother, who had passed away not long ago, gave her a chest of drawers, and the mycotoxins were, I think, in the second drawer from the bottom on like the left hand side, and he would just like bark and point his nose. It was pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, I've heard about mold dogs being used. I
Yeah,
would love for to just use that all the time. Just be like, hey, buddy, come on, give me some
exactly.
help.
The only thing that I came across that's a little problematic is obviously the height. There's a
They
limitation
can't
in terms of,
reach.
yeah. But now we have the cameras where you can look behind walls for condensation. But it's tricky. I was watching an interview with someone a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about how real estate agents, they don't really want you to test, because if it's positive, then they have to disclose by law that there's mycotoxins. Do you have any experience with that?
Oh, wow. I didn't know they had to legally disclose it. That's amazing. Because I
Yeah.
know a lot of people, they'll sell their house because there's mold or black mold and they want to get out right away. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
I have a client who owns a big real estate firm, and he said they can lose their license if they know that there's mold and they
Good.
don't disclose it, which
Good.
we need to hold. I mean, well, you're in the Southeast, but around here in the low country in South Carolina, they'll put up framework. It's raining, they may not come back for 2, 3, even 4 weeks.
Yes.
And then you're putting a dwelling on top of that. And then you expose the mycotoxins in addition to non-native EMFs, 5G
Mhm.
Wi-Fi, and the mold spores are excreting extra mycotoxins. So yeah, it's extremely problematic. And we have an epidemic of autoimmunity. Obviously, that's not the sole cause, but it's a major cause, I think. In my opinion, would you agree?
I think it's a big contributing factor for sure. I think,
Yeah.
everything that we're exposed to in our environment, whether that's, molds, environmental toxins, anything that is like in our food too, carrageenan, the potassium sorbate, anything, all these like emulsifiers, all these things, plus chronic stress is causing just such an increased inflammatory and histamine reaction. And then with that, we do also have like the IL-6, the interleukins, and all that creating just such inflammatory responses to our bodies. And that's causing this like detrimental autoimmunity like rise that we're seeing in people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Klebsiella a minute ago, and Jeff Bland, Dr. Jeff Bland, he said that 74% of people with a diagnostic label of RA have an overgrowth of Klebsiella, which
I'm
I
not
thought,
shocked. That Citrobacter as
because
well. I can
I
see
know
that.
you like the GI map, and so do
Mhm.
I. And that has the whole autoimmune inducing
Yep.
bacteria section. So and I think looking at the oral microbiome. So if I see Prevotella or Fusobacteria high on a GI map, I'll send them to a biological dentist and have them do an
Smart.
oral DNA test.
Yeah.
And it's 99.9% of the time it's positive.
Yeah. And same with staphylococcus. Like I see a lot of staph secondary to being in the nasal passages.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to the points of entry in the body, right? The nose, the mouth, the gut. And so secretory IgA, if that's low from stress, to your point about cortisol, that's going to lower secretory IgA, then we can't protect ourselves from, these invaders or potential invaders, right?
No, same with stomach acid, our first line of defense in our gut, right? Somebody that has normal stomach acid will be able to clear out any potential like E. coli, salmonella, any type of bacteria that come their way, or maybe even a parasite. But if you have chronic stress, maybe from work, maybe from over exercising, under eating, whatever it is, you might lose that stomach acid and you don't have that ability to combat those other infections and pathogens.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's an infectious, or at least I should say immune system component to almost every disorder out there. Even if you look at something like arterial plaque, when you examine arterial plaque, oftentimes there's mast cells, okay, and then there's foam cells, which are immature macrophages. And so why would they be in there? Because typically there's a pathogen component. For example, Coxsackie B virus type 4 increases your risk of a cardiovascular event by 33% roughly. But how many cardiologists test for it? But it's right there in PubMed, if you look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. There's a lot of things that just make my brain like go in circles whenever somebody's like, oh, my doctor won't pull XYZ. Like I just had a client, we talked about the nose, right? Sweet girl, she went to a lake and she went tubing and she got water up her nose. And she didn't think right away, hey, this could be secondary to that. But I was like, you know what? Let's just go to the doctor. Let's have them do some shape or form of screening. There could be an infection in your nose. Let's check it. And they did that work and she got antibiotics for it. Praise God, the doctor did that. But then she had this severe anxiety, panic attack issue secondary after the antibiotic finished. And I told her that was a response from your gut with histamine, with the lack of the beneficial bacteria causing this neurological issue in your central nervous system. Right. And she told her doctor, and her doctor said, no, that can't be it. I literally pulled it up in Google with antibiotics and the side effects to the brain anxiety. And I was like, can he not see that that's literally in PubMed right there?
Yeah. You conspiracy theorist, Lacey.
No, I'm not.
No, I'm being facetious. I mean, I say that because, it's kind of a go-to response when someone doesn't know something, they just assume it's not true. Right. There's a big difference between something not being true and someone not knowing about it. Right. I had a client about 3 or 4 years ago. Her husband's uncle is on faculty at Harvard School of Medicine. Oh. And he told her that there was no proof that mold was harmful. And so I shared my screen. I went to PubMed. We typed in, okay, Stachybotrys. There's like, 4 dozen results that come up, and this is supposed to be the best medical school in the country. Yeah. And, it's unfortunate because I think if we tested everyone in an oncology unit in any hospital in the country, they're going to have elevated mycotoxins.
Oh, of course. Hospitals and schools.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So what are you working on now that you're excited about?
Honestly, I am working on planning my wedding. That's really what my focus is on right now. Thank you. Thank you.
When's the wedding?
May 4th.
And is there going to be like a molecular hydrogen station, a red light therapy station?
There definitely should be. No, it's just gonna be a lot of fun and a lot of dancing and coffee because we all love coffee. But yeah, that's what I'm focusing on. I really do have a goal too of eventually writing another book. It's going to be more of like a prenatal, fertility type of book, but that's going to be some years for that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned coffee. So let's touch on mycotoxins in coffee, aka the whole bulletproof thing. Talk to people why, for certain people, if you have a mold bucket, right? You talked about different buckets. Right. And if you've been exposed to some mold at school and a little bit more at work, and then your coffee has mold, it can cause the mold bucket to tip over.
It's literally, it could be the last drop. And, there's canaries in a gold mine. So we have the HLA gene, which can impact your ability to be more sensitive to mold. Then, of course, there's anybody that has more so like poor histamine degradation or genetics that can cause somebody to be more symptomatic or sensitive. But unfortunately, just like any grain product, oat product, mold essentially, not mold, coffee essentially, they make the grounds and they just stick it like in a humid factory. And unfortunately that can breed mycotoxins. And then when you get that package, you don't know that that's there. You make your coffee, you drink it, and that's going directly into your bloodstream. And that can store up in your body and your body fat and create this reaction. Unfortunately now it's more than just actually mold that's in the coffee too. There also are heavy metals like aluminum and the espresso. So yeah, coffee is a whole thing. And it's sad because coffee is supposed to be good for getting rid of mycotoxins because it helps promote bile. So we're helping to get rid of the mycotoxins that way. But yeah, with mold in particular, low mycotoxin coffee is definitely, or can be, key. And that's how, like, for me, I transitioned because I was so scared of like the K cups, which do have an increased risk, or the bid packet. So now I'm addicted to liquid coffee. But Yeah, it's a struggle.
What do you think about, not to put you on the spot, but the Danger coffee?
Danger coffee. I have only, isn't that just higher caffeine? Do they test? Do you know if they test for the mycotoxins?
Well, I thought it was the new name for Bulletproof. Like whoever bought Bulletproof, they changed it. That's what I thought. I don't drink
Oh,
coffee, so I don't know, but that's what I was told.
I'm sure I
I
could
drink,
look into it.
I drink molecular hydration.
Nice.
That's what I do. So, in terms of, ways to address mycotoxins, we talked about bile.
Yeah.
Do you use with your clients the Patricia Kane protocol, aka the lipid exchange protocol at all, or components of it?
No, I haven't heard of that, but I do follow like Dr. Jill Krista. I kind of follow the way that she does it in regards to peeling the orange. So avoidance, protection, binding, excretion, and really focus on detox drainage pathways. But exposure is the first thing. But no, I haven't heard of that. I definitely need to look into that.
Yeah, so she's a PhD, but she trains MDs and other healthcare providers. And you can do it IV, you can do it orally. I tend to combine, different parts of different protocols, but
Yeah.
it's high dose phosphatidylcholine
Oh, I love
combined with
phosphatidylcholine.
TUDCA,
Okay.
and some butyrate. That those are the main components. IV form, it's pretty expensive, so it's cost prohibitive for some people.
Yeah.
But the phosphatidylcholine, not only does it rehab the cell membranes, it's going to help with bile flow.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, there's a good book. Her book's called literally the Detox Book. Um, Patricia Kane protocol, Dr. Patricia Kane.
Oh, that's
So
cool. Yeah, I use all of those when it comes down to clients, like Membrane Men by Quicksilver. I love their formula with the phosphatidylcholine. Tunica, there's a lot of good products. One of them by Revive MD. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they have
uh-huh.
Tunica, Milk Thistle, NAC in there. So yeah, there's a lot. It sounds like I use some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And binders, what's your favorite binder?
Oh, that's a controversial question. I like using binders based on the types of the mold species or the metals, whatever is there, to focus on like what binder has an affinity for that specific type of mold. But my top two favorites right now, I love the Toxumi Supreme, which is bamboo, and I love the Ultra Binder by Quicksilver because
Okay.
it's got a lot in there. Those are my top two favorites right now in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, I know certain, depending on like the molecular weight, is what drives whether the binder works for that particular toxin, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they say the energy affinity too, as well. But yeah, I try and focus on like what is in the literature that I know that potentially could bind to that specific mold species. And then I always keep in mind whenever you're doing mold testing, like in the body in particular, sometimes there's more mold that's in the body than you actually see. So I also try and focus on like how can I get a broad spectrum amount of different binders that might attach and have affinity for other molds that are hidden that could also be present in the body.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have anyone who does a urine mycotoxin test, they do it provoked. So infrared sauna session
Love
or
that.
some liposomal glutathione, or if they have access to a clinic, glutathione push, because otherwise you just collect your urine, it could be a false negative, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
that's why I
we try
love
to,
fasting for that too.
yeah, absolutely. What's something you know today you wish you would have known when you first started practicing?
For myself or my clients?
Both.
Okay, so for myself, I wish I would have known that I didn't need to work all the time. I didn't need to burn myself out because I thought I just could help and help and help. But little did I know that that was actually greatly impacting my ability to actually help by burning me out. And then
Right.
for my clients, honestly, I wish I think that's a great question, honestly. I think I would have gone first into more parasympathetic somatic therapies. That's going to be my answer, hands down.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I always focused on like giving suggestions, but I didn't necessarily know what to suggest. So I think that knowing about trauma informed practices, DNRS, EMDR, GUPTA, primal trust, I think that would be hands down what I wish I would have known.
Have you tried this device?
No, what is that?
So this is called the Hoolist, and it has so you take the top off and it has little silicone probes that go in here. I'm just charging it right now. You apply it here.
Oh, so
So
it's
it's,
Bacon's nerve stimulator.
yeah, it was developed by a guy who's a doctor of biomedical engineering. And, most of the vagus nerve stimulators I've tried have not worked, at least not for me and for people I work with. This has, and it has a 60-day, 100% money back guarantee. So there's literally no risk, and it's not a subscription service where you pay like every month. It's
Yeah.
just a one-time fee. So now, obviously, you still need to do like meditation or DNRS or primal trust, but this can really help people to get out of a rut. It's just like 1 to 2 minutes, 3 times a day.
That's
Something to
awesome.
consider.
I'm gonna look into that too. There's so many different vagus nerve stimulators that are out there too,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating seeing that created. But then there's the aspect a lot of people are using those, and then they're not doing the internal other work that they need to
Yeah.
do. So
Yeah.
hoping people know to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my buddy, Dr. Ryan Cedermark, he's a chiropractic neurologist and a nurse practitioner. And he has a clinic in Atlanta where he does neural rehab for traumatic brain injuries, strokes, things like that. And he's using it with his patients. And so I asked him before I tried it. He's like, yeah. And I haven't regretted buying it. So something to consider. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your time. We'll let you get back to your busy schedule and staying shredded and buff, and don't intimidate too many people at the gym, because there's limitations. Like, other people need to lift weights too. If you're got 18 dumbbells, you can't lift them all yourself. Maybe you can. I don't know.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to speak with you and be on your podcast. I cannot say that I won't intimidate people, even though I don't think I do, but I'll keep going.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lacey. We'll put your links up on the show notes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Have a blessed day.
Thanks. You too.